So, thank you. So, President Arnn and faculty and students and parents and friends of Hillsdale College, again, thank you for having me. I have a rather big topic here tonight that I can't possibly cover in 40-some minutes because we want to have a Q&A at the end. So you do have to invite me back so I can do another hour or so. So the topic tonight is NASA and the movies, which is a really, really big topic. So my friend and manager, an agent and publicist and all-around guy, Burke Allen, made a list, because he knew that I wouldn't do it, made a list of space movies that Hollywood has done in the very recent past. But I remember even growing up in Colwood, West Virginia, before Sputnik, that I saw a number of space movies. They were all pretty hokey, of course. That was well before CGI or anything like that. It was mostly about aliens coming to Earth and warning us that we really shouldn't blow up our planet, you know, that kind of thing. And then we got television in Colwood in 1954, and they already had space series going on. There was Tom Corbett and the Space Cadets that I loved, Rod Brown and the Rocket Rangers. Loved the alliteration of that whole thing. And then we were all great readers of science fiction growing up, Heinlein and Asimov and all those guys. So we were really kind of primed for what happened in 1957 when the Russians launched Sputnik. And I'll get to all of that. But first, let me go down Burke's list, if you don't mind. So, in 1968, and I was just back from Vietnam when I saw this movie, 2001: A Space Odyssey. I mean, great movie, a little boring in parts, frankly. But Danube Waltz went on way too long in that movie. But you know, God has a sense of humor when it comes to me. I later met, not the main actors in that movie, but two of the guys that played the monkeys. You may not have, some of you may not have seen the movie, but at the very start, they have apes, they're actually apes. And they come out and they're fighting each other and they discover, hey, I can take this bone and really whack you hard with it. Matter of fact, I can kill you with this thing. So they hired these, actually they were young boys to play these apes. And when I went to Huntsville, Alabama and started working for NASA, I met a fellow by the name of Fred Ordway, who was Wernher von Braun's assistant. His two sons, Fred Jr. and Albert, were two of the apes in 2001. So it's a good movie. You should watch that. Capricorn 1, which is where that all started, this whole did we really go to the moon conspiracy theory. Capricorn 1 was a movie about astronauts that, it came out in '75, so it was after the Apollo program. It was about astronauts that faked going to Mars. And then because they got found out, of course, the federal government wanted to kill them. I noticed that Burke says it stars Elliot Gould and James Brolin. For some reason, he left off the third actor, O.J. Simpson, that was in that movie. So let's don't watch Capricorn 1. The Right Stuff. Now, The Right Stuff was a great movie. I was actually working for NASA when that came out in 1983, and that got Chuck Yeager. And I had read Tom Wolfe's book before that, great book, and then they made the movie, and it's kind of a satire in a way, but it brought back the heroism of Chuck Yeager, the man who first broke the sound barrier. Chuck Yeager grew up about 30 miles from me in Colwood. I knew all about, the only thing that surprised me about the movie that he was still alive. And then I got to meet him several times over the years, delightful. He made me call him General, and General Yeager, and I met him first time in Maxwell Air Force Base. They had what they called Gathering of the Eagles, and they called me from Maxwell and they said, Homer, you know, we've seen your movie, we've read your book, we want you to come down and get your eagle gathered. So I went down to Maxwell, and there was Chuck Yeager, my hero from the boyhood, from very beginning. And all these guys, they were just like famous test pilots and war heroes. And they were telling war stories like, yeah, there I was flying out of London, and I shot down a Messerschmitt, and then I caught a ride to the Philippines, and I shot down a Japanese Zero all on the same day. They were telling that's the kind of stories they were telling. And Chuck turned to me. He had heard that I was also from West Virginia, and he said, Homer, why are you here? And I went, well, I wrote this book, And he said, I want to take you for a ride. So he took me out. He had a T6 trainer, and I had my pilot's license, but he wouldn't let me touch the stick. I was right behind him. And he said, we took off in this thing, and he said, well, Homer, what would you want to do? What do you want to do? And I said, I don't know, General, whatever you want to do. And he said, I want to wring this puppy out. And I went, uh-oh. So he did everything he could possibly do to make me sick. We were flying upside down and sideways and backwards. We were over the golf course at Maxwell Air Force Base, and my thought was, if we auger in and we both die, the Charleston, West Virginia Gazette is going to be all about Yeager. He's going to get top billing. And way down on the next page, maybe they'll say, and also that guy Homer Hickam died. So, but he didn't make me sick. I'm a scuba instructor, and I'd been on the Vomit Comet, the KC-135 at NASA a million times, and I'd never gotten sick, so he was very disappointed, didn't make me sick. But he was a great guy. So let's see. Space Camp. All right, Space Camp came out in 1986, and I'm on the commission that operates Space Camp in Huntsville, Alabama. Let me recommend it to you if you've got a young person 8 through 98 that wants to go to Space Camp, please go. There are scholarships available, but look it up, www.spacecamp.com, and you can see all the programs that we have there. Unfortunately, Space Camp, the movie, came out the same year, but the Challenger went down, and so it didn't do very well. We need a Space Camp 2 now. We have re-energized that program. It's a tremendous program, but I do recommend watching that. Apollo 13 is the one that we generally think about, NASA movie, and that's very well done. People are always asking me about what was it like working on the Apollo program, and I would say, I don't know. I was in Vietnam at the time. But Apollo 13, very, very well done film, obviously. But when I was at NASA, I realized how important Apollo 13 had been to the overall program. The feeling was, after Apollo 13, was that we were going to lose a crew eventually. And so when Congress decided, rather foolishly, that it was all too expensive and we were going to shut it down, NASA didn't much argue about it. They went, let's have the shuttle, which turned out to be about 10 times more dangerous than the Apollo program was. But those are the things that you learn. But I recommend that. There's this movie, October Sky. I'll talk about it a little bit later. Space Cowboys, which is interesting movie. I loved it, by the way. I loved the fact that the astronauts hated the monkeys going before them. That was true. Gravity is a great movie with Sandra Bullock, but naturally it's going to be good watching her. And I worked in the neutral buoyancy simulator a lot, underwater in the spacesuits, so I could really see how much work that they had done to make that accurate. The Martian is okay. Andy Weir's a great writer, but I just couldn't get into it because I immediately saw all the technical problems with that. But I still recommend it. It's very good. Hidden Figures, obviously. Hidden Figures about the women who were brought in to work up all of the data for the trajectories of starting with the Mercury and the Gemini spacecraft. And Katherine Johnson, like Chuck Yeager, is a fellow West Virginian, so definitely recommend that. First Man's a great movie about Neil Armstrong. And now, that's Burke's list. Thank you, Burke. Very well done. And now we can talk about October Sky. So October Sky, how did that happen? Well, I always wanted to be a writer. And even though, yes, I loved working for NASA, and it was everything that I did for NASA as an engineer and an astronaut training manager was just great fun, and really an amazing thing for a Colwood boy to do. But I also always wanted to be a writer. So before I worked for NASA, I researched for 15 years. I was a scuba instructor, so I spent a lot of time diving shipwrecks, and I researched for 15 years the U-boat war along the East Coast during World War II. I actually dived on 2 of the U-boat wrecks off of the coast. And ultimately, I ended up getting that published in 1989 by the Naval Institute Press. So I had credentials as a writer already. It was a military history bestseller. By the way, an insurance agency or an insurance agent up in Maryland, when I started writing this book, I was also publishing some articles about the U-boat wars and so on. This insurance agent started writing me and asking me questions about these articles about submarines. He wanted to know all about submarines because he wanted to write a book about submarines. And I just kind of blew him off because I thought he was trying to steal my stuff. His name, by the way, was Tom Clancy. So Tom reminded me that I still have his first edition of The Hunt for Red October, signed by Tom Clancy with thanks for helping him. And when I die, you'll know it because that's going to be on eBay so fast. My daughter-in-law will probably have that right on eBay. But anyway, so I had this credential as a writer already, but then I got really busy training the astronauts for Space Lab over in Japan. I trained the first Japanese astronauts how to fly aboard the Space Lab. And then I got assigned to the International Space Station and ended up going over to Russia a whole bunch of times and negotiating with the Russians on how to train astronauts and cosmonauts in the space station. By the way, President Trump and Mr. Musk, I can tell you how to negotiate with the Russians. They're always going to say no at the conference table. And then they're going to have a party, and everybody's going to drink vodka. All right. That's where you negotiate with the Russians. I killed so many potted plants in Moscow. Well, and then filled the glass back up with water. And negotiated with the Russians on how we were going to, and it was very successful. And they also, I also made common cause with them by saying, you know, when I was a boy in Colwood, West by God, Virginia, you launched Sputnik, and that so enthralled me, and hundreds of thousands of young people across the nation to learn how to build rockets. You guys, whether we knew it or not, were kind of like our heroes. And they loved this story. And I think that's why they agreed with, what I wanted. And they said, would you like to see Sputnik 1? And I said, yes, but I think it burned up in the atmosphere about 50 years ago. And they said, we built 2. And we picked one at random to fly. You want to see the other one? So I get choked up on this because it was so great. They took me to a warehouse like out of Indiana Jones. They had all these boxes, and they opened up one, and there, with all kinds of hay around it, was Sputnik 1. And I said, can I touch it? And they said, we don't care, So I got to touch Sputnik 1. It's now in a museum. And but I got that opportunity, so that worked out for me really well. So anyway, I wrote Torpedo Junction. It did very, very well. And then I got so busy with the Japanese and the Russians and the other astronauts and working in the Hubble Space Telescope repair mission. I got to do all these things. I didn't have time to write anything book length, and I thought I was really born to write Torpedo Junction. I thought that was the book I was born to write. But I did start writing little articles on the side for a variety of different magazines, and one of them was Smithsonian Air and Space. And one night in 1995, around Christmas, I got a call from the editor of Smithsonian Air and Space. Her name was Pat Trenner, and she said, "Homer, I need a filler. I need like 2,000 words. You've got the reputation around here of being a fast writer." She didn't say a good writer, fast writer. "Can you get me 2,000 words on something that I can put in the magazine? And I need it, by the way, in 2 days." And for some reason, I looked across on my desk, and I'd been using it for a paperweight. The only artifact that I had left from when I was a boy going to Big Creek High School in West Virginia and built rockets. The only artifact I had left, this little rocket nozzle. And for some reason, I looked at that rocket nozzle and I said, "Pat, I could write you 2,000 words on when I was a boy in West Virginia and I built rockets." And Pat Trenner was totally, utterly underwhelmed with this idea. But I did it anyway. And I'm a fast writer. So I didn't remember everything. That had been a lot of years and then a lot of different things that happened in between. But I did remember Miss Riley, my teacher, and the other boys. And I wrote 2,000 words that I made it kind of funny about us blowing things up. And I did it overnight, and I faxed it, as you did back then, to Pat. And she came back and she said, "Homer, I think you're onto something here. Half my office has been laughing at your article, and the other half has been crying. You got something. And I'm going to publish it, and we're going to make it a major article. Do you have pictures of that science fair award that you won?" And I did, and anything else that you have. And it came out a few months later, and my phone almost started to melt down. Mostly from teachers and parents saying, "This is wonderful, this is great." But also, I got a call from publishers who knew me from Torpedo Junction, and they said, "Are you going to write a book about this?" And I went, "I am now." So I did. I started writing it, and it attracted some attention from a small producer out in Hollywood. I remember I was sitting at my desk there at NASA and minding my own business like I tend to do. And they had a little cubicle right outside of my office where they would put mail that comes in. And I remember walking out of that office and seeing this envelope. And to this day, I'm not sure I did the right thing, but I picked up this envelope, and it was from this small producer in Hollywood. "We want to make a movie based on your article." And I went, maybe there's a big producer who would want to do that. So I was smart. I knew a fellow by the name of Neil Russell, who had thought about optioning Torpedo Junction to make a movie, but had decided not to do it. But I knew about him, and he had made mostly like gangster movies and blood and guts type of movies, and I knew he wouldn't be interested in this. But I called Neil, and he said, "No, I'm not interested, but I know an agent that you need to talk to. His name is Mickey Freiberg. He's known as the cowboy agent of Hollywood. I think he'll like it." So I called, or he had Mickey call me, and I talked to Mickey a little bit about this, and I was going to write a book about it, and maybe somebody would want to make a movie. He said, "If I can't sell this, I'm going to hang up my spurs." So he said, "Write me a treatment. Can you write me a treatment? And I'll get it out to the big guys." And I go, "Sure, I can write you a treatment." What, by the way, is a treatment? So it says, give me a page, maybe a page and a half, on what this story is and what it would look like in the movie. So I did, and started writing the book. And before I knew it, Mickey had sold it to Chuck Gordon, who was the producer of Die Hard, and also a Field of Dreams. And this kind of fit the Field of Dreams, thing. And he liked father-son stories, and he recognized immediately that this was a father-son story. So before I knew it, Universal Studios, under Chuck Gordon Productions, came down, and I had optioned a book that I hadn't even written yet. Wow. And it's unknown. It's totally unknown. And usually you have a best-selling book and it takes a decade before they make a movie out of it. All of a sudden, I had a contract, but I needed to write the book. But Chuck went on out. He hired Joe Johnston, the wonderful director, Joe Johnston, who had done The Rocketeer and Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. And then he went out and got an A-list writer by the name of Louis Kolick, who had grown up in Brooklyn and didn't even know for sure West Virginia existed. He thought the capital of West Virginia was Richmond. I reminded him that we had a civil war about this, 1863, we went our own way. Thank you very much. But I had about, 4 or 5 chapters already. And I had a lot of trouble writing that book at first. I thought, how am I going to write this book? And I had to really jog my memory about what happened. And I thought, okay, the way I'll write this book is I'm going to write about my NASA career, which is fascinating, right? And I will just reference back to when I was a boy in West Virginia, but it'll be mostly about, me, the me that I knew, Homer Hickam. And I started in this book, and I was 200 pages in, and it just was not working. And I realized God loves to have fun with me, and I really didn't want to do this. I realized I was going to have to let that boy tell the story, which meant I was going to have to get inside the head of that 14 through 17-year-old boy who had all those problems with his dad, which I had put out of my mind over all those years, and it was the hardest thing. To find Sonny Hickam, as I was known back then, to find that boy and let him tell that story. So I threw the 200 pages away. I started all over again. And Louis Kolick by then was coming in. I was convincing Louis, you can do this, Louis. Colwood was like Brooklyn, everybody knows everybody else's business. You get out and play in the streets, you mess up. Before you get home, your parents know about it. It was exactly the same in Colwood. So Louis and I got to be good friends, and he started developing the movie while I was writing the book. That's why there's differences. And I don't always everybody's always asking me, well, what was it like getting scholarships, for instance? It's like, well, we didn't actually get scholarships, but Louis thought we should, so we did. So it was an interesting development going back and forth on this. And while I was writing a book, and then before I knew it, Frank Wyman, one of the top agents in New York, heard about it and wanted to agent me. And before I knew it, they were auctioning the book off to all the top publishers in New York. And I go, golly, maybe it's time to end my NASA career and go off and be a writer. And so that's the way it all developed. And so Joe Johnston came on. The book wasn't quite finished. Louis had pretty well finished his screenplay, and I had critiqued it and made all kinds of suggestions, none of which they took. And that I tried to keep getting it closer to the book, and they kept trying to go in the other direction. That's fine. I understand all of that. And Joe was, and Chuck Gordon was gracious enough to invite me to where they were making the movie, which was up around Oak Ridge, Tennessee, which they felt was close enough to West Virginia, and they actually had an airport as versus West Virginia. So, so that they needed to fly, they could fly to LA every day with the rushes. And so most of the days of that movie, I was on set. I got to meet, of course, the wonderful Jake Gyllenhaal. By the way, I like to say this is the 26th year that I have of going around the world apologizing for not actually being Jake Gyllenhaal. But Jake was a wonderful young man. He was only 16 at the time. He had to be accompanied by his mother, Naomi Foner, who was a screenplay writer herself. Every night, he had to take high school classes while we made the movie. And every night, he would have to go to the hotel and with his mom. The other boys, the actors who were playing the other boys, were actually in their early 20s. They could be found at the Oak Ridge Walmart every night, attracting all the local Tennessee girls. So if Jake looked stressed in that movie, he was stressed. But he did a wonderful job, and he's still a good friend. And I just think the world of Jake Gyllenhaal, and that Joe Johnston was prescient enough to hire him to play me. So when I watch the movie, I often reflect on some of the things that were going on set. Again, I got to meet the actors. Natalie Canada played my mom, a wonderful actress. My mom actually was still alive when we made the movie, and she came to set one day, and I introduced her to Natalie. And my mom said, well, I was hoping Kathy Bates would play me, but you'll do. Thanks, Mom. Natalie was very understanding. She took it. Chris Cooper, who played my dad, did a great job. And Chris wanted some personal artifacts of my dad, so I gave him my dad's Masonic ring and his wristwatch and his lucky silver dollar that he carried. And when my mom met Chris and saw these things that he had, she was just dumbfounded and started crying when she met Chris. And so that was a great thing that she got to do that. I only got kicked off set one day, and that was because of Laura Dern. So Laura played Miss Riley, and she had read Lewis's screenplay and thought that her part was not big enough. So she would invite me into her dressing trailer there and pump me for information, because she hadn't read the book, about Miss Riley. My wonderful science teacher. And so I would tell her, things about the real personality of Miss Riley and how important she was to us. And then what I heard from the producers was, well, Homer, all we hear out of Laura Dern is, well, Homer said Miss Riley should do this and do that. And they basically said, maybe you need to take a break from the set for maybe forever. But it was only a few days, and I came back. But Laura did expand her part quite a bit. And I do remember watching the rushes where they had scenes that Laura was doing, and they were kind of laughing. It's like, yeah, we'll never use it. They used everything. When they got into the editing room, they realized that they really did need to flesh out the Miss Riley character, and only because Laura insisted on these scenes that it happened. One of the major scenes, for those of you who just saw the movie or seen it before, is where the boys blow up the picket fence around their house. First rocket, right? So in the movie, that lasts about 30 seconds in the movie. The boys put this basically bomb on the fence, and they go, how high is it going to go, Homer? And they go, a few miles, it'll be great. And should we get behind something? And boom, the fence goes up. 30 seconds. Let me read from the book what really happened. So Sputnik had happened. I got all enamored about building rockets, and I decided I was going to build one. And I convinced these other boys to do it with me. So I appointed myself chief rocket designer. Odell, who was a garbage man's son, provided me with a small discarded plastic flashlight to use as the body of the rocket. I emptied its batteries and then punched a hole in its base with a nail. I cracked open my cherry bombs left over from the 4th of July and poured the powder from them into the flashlight, and then wrapped it all up in electrical tape. You can tell where this is going already, right? I took one of the cherry bomb fuses and I stuck it in the hole, and then I glued the entire apparatus inside the fuselage of a D-wing plastic model airplane. I recall it was an F-100 Super Sabre. Sherman, who had polio and therefore couldn't run very fast, and also because it was his idea, he was placed in charge of the countdown, a position that allowed him to stand back. Roy Lee was to bring the matches. Odell was to strike the match and hand it to me. I would light the fuse and make a run for it. Everybody had something to do. When night came, we balanced our rocket, looking wicked and sleek on top of my mother's rose garden fence. This was no picket fence, by the way. This was used mine wire and 4x4s and a 2x4 on top. This is a sturdy fence. The fence was a source of some pride and satisfaction to my mom. She had spent months reminding my dad to send the company carpenter down to build it to protect her beloved rose bushes. The night was cold and clear, all the better, we thought, for us to track our rocket. As it streaked across the dark and starry sky, we waited till some coal cars rumbled past, and then I lit the fuse and ran back to the grass at the edge of the rose bushes. Odell smacked his hand over his mouth to smother his excited giggle. Sparkles of fire dribbled out of the fuse. Sherman was counting backward from 10. We waited expectantly, and then Sherman reached 0 and yelled, "Blast off!" just as the cherry bomb powder detonated. There was an eyewitness, a miner waiting for a ride across the street. For the edification of our Colwood fence gossipers, he would later describe what he had seen. There was, he reported, a huge flash in the Hickams' backyard, and a sound like God himself had clapped his hands. Then an arc of fire lifted up and up into the darkness, turning and cartwheeling and spewing bright sparks. The way the man told it, our rocket was a glorious sight. And I guess he was right as far as it went. The only problem was, it wasn't our rocket that streaked into that cold, clear, and starry night. It was my mother's rose garden fence. So that's the difference between the movie and the book, right? A little different action there. My mom came out, and actually, if she had killed me at that moment, there would not have been a West Virginia jury that would have convicted her. So, all right, Mrs. Hickam, saved us the price of rope later. I'm sure it's okay. Go your way. So when people read the book and see the movie, they ask me about the differences, and I just have to say that when you make a movie, you've only got about 2 hours to tell this story. So a lot of things have to be compressed, right? And where the book and the movie go, they're all going for the same result. And that is that the father and son have a moment of reconciliation together. And this became a point of contention, though, between me and Joe Johnston. He had an idea of how this scene should be filmed, and I had written the entire book and kept myself from writing that scene because I wanted to have all of Sonny Hickam's emotions and feeling of unhappiness between him and his father, but I wanted to write that scene perfectly in the way that it actually happened. Joe had a different idea. So my contention was, my father did not put his arm around me. I put my arm around him. Let me read how it really happened. And by the way, though, it still makes you cry either way. Still makes me cry. So this was after the National Science Fair, and I'd come back with the gold medal. And we wanted to do something for the people of Colwood that has supported us all the way through, except for my dad, who had never come to any of our rocket launches. Auk 31, we named our rockets, by the way, after a bird that couldn't fly. We had a sense of humor about that. The Great Auk was our last and biggest rocket, 6.5 feet long, 2¼ inches in diameter. We carefully raised it into a vertical position and then lowered it on the launch rod. Inside it was the nozzle that was touched by Dr. Von Braun. It had been designed to reach an altitude of 5 miles. With a rocket this size, I thought perhaps we were exceeding the critical dimensions of our propellant, which we called Zincoshine, zinc dust, sulfur, and 200 proof moonshine alcohol. Easy to get in West Virginia. I hoped it wouldn't blow up, but I knew it might. I knelt at its base and started twisting together the ignition wire connection. Sonny Roy Lee said, "Do you see who's here?" And I looked up from my work. Who? Look, the town constable opened a path through the crowd, and there stood my dad in his work clothes. And Roy Lee went after him, escorting him on the coal dump. And I heard Roy Lee say, "Come and help us, Mr. Hickam." "Oh, you don't need my help," Dad said. "I just came to watch. Elsie made me." All the boys protested. "No, sir, you can help all you want. Whatever you want to do, sir, just come on and do it." And I stood up and brushed the cold dirt off my jeans and said, "A rocket won't fly unless somebody lights the fuse. Come on, Dad, this one's yours if you want it." There was no mistaking the pure delight I saw in his eyes, which surprised me. And we had him kneel in front of the panel, and Royley called from the back of our blockhouse and said, "Whenever you're ready." I counted down to 0, and Dad turned the switch. Arc 31 erupted, blowing huge chunks of concrete loose from the pad. The crowd took a step backward, and some of them started to run. Arc 31 seemed to split the air that filled the narrow valley, a shockwave rippling across the slack. Women screamed and men clapped their hands to their ears. We boys came pouring outside the blockhouse. The thunderous din didn't stop. Arc 31 kept pounding us as it climbed. Men, women, and children all watched it with mouths agape, eyes wide, their cheers stuck in their throats. At the company store, those few old men out at the launch got uncertainly to their feet as the thunder reached them. They stumbled into the road, shading their eyes, the trunk of fire and smoke tearing out of the mountain like God's finger stuck suddenly toward the sky. In his church, the preacher raced to the belfry and began to toll the bell in celebration. Royley kept his eye on his watch. 38, 39, 40. "Still see it," Billy announced. The great spout of smoke turned into a dim yellowish streak. Just about gone. 43, 44. "Gone," Billy announced. "Gone at 44 seconds. I did a quick calculation. Assuming it was flying nearly vertical, Arc 31 had disappeared at an altitude of 31,000 feet, nearly 6 miles high." And I became aware of movement beside me, and I was astonished to see my dad, coal mine superintendent, dancing in the coal dust. He was waving his old hat in his hand, and he was exulting to the sky. Beautiful, beautiful. As Arc 31 raced across the sunlit sky on that glorious day, I instead watched my dad and waited patiently and with hope for him to put his arm around my shoulder and tell me at last that I had done something good. "There," I heard Billy yell. "There it is." People surged across our launch range, following the other boys as they raced after our last great rocket. And my dad stopped his dance, and he put his old hat on. He bent over as if a great weight had suddenly been dropped on his back. He looked at me, his mouth open, and I saw in his eyes a curious mixture of happiness and pain that dissolved into fear. I went to him and put my arm around him, around his shoulder, supporting him while he fought for air against the black lung that would kill him all too soon. "You did really good, Dad," I told him as a spasm of deep, oily coughs racked his body. "Nobody ever launched a rocket better than you." So that's the way I told it. But Joe Johnston was right. The movie, you would not remember that movie if we'd shown my dad in trouble like that. It wouldn't have meant it as much as having my dad come out and put his arm, Chris Cooper put his arm around Chris Cooper, or around Jake Gyllenhaal. He was absolutely right, the way that he did it, and I agreed with him. The only thing in the end that I disagreed about the movie was changing the name. It was supposed to be Rocket Boys, like the book, you know. October Sky is an anagram of Rocket Boys. You move the letters around and of October Sky, and it spells Rocket Boys and vice versa. So they had done some test audiences with the movie, and the audiences kind of liked the movie, but they hated the name. They thought Rocket Boys, it just sounded like a NASA movie, space movie or something. And so they decided to change it. And so Joe and Chuck called me one night and they said, Homer, we've got the perfect name for your movie. We're going to call it October Sky because, you know, Sputnik was launched in October, End of the Sky. You know all that, right? It's a perfect title. And I said, I hate that title. I hate everything about that title. If you don't call it Rocket Boys, I'll have nothing to do with this movie ever. And in unison, they said, great, we knew you'd love it, and hung up. October Sky is actually a better title. I'm not good at titles. Right now, to wrap this up very quickly, there is another movie in the works. This one is based upon one of the sequels to Rocket Boys. It's called The Colwood Way, and it's actually a Christmas story during the era of the Rocket Boys. And it was also a bestseller. Somehow it never got optioned over the years, but actually I didn't have the rights to it, but recently I did get the rights back to it. So we're now in what we call pre-production hell, which means we don't have any money. But we're going to raise the money, and I'm going to bow to Chuck and Joe on this, on the title. It's going to be called December Sky. So hopefully that'll be coming out on Netflix or something in the future years. So this is a story of, in a way, of NASA and Hollywood, and my little piece of Hollywood with October Sky. And I hope you've enjoyed my remarks. And now I will open it up for Q&A. Thank you very much. Thank you. Let's see. This may be working. Is this working? Yes, sir. Okay, great. All right, so I can move around a little bit. So.
Thank you. Mr. Hickam has agreed to sign copies of his books, Rocket Boys and Don't Blow Yourself Up, directly after this session in the Searle lobby. Yeah. We now have time for a Q&A. If you have a question...
Don't blow yourself up for the title alone. It's a good reminder every day. Just look at the cover and go, yeah, that's a good idea.
Very true. Very true. If you have a question, please make your way to a microphone. Student questions will be given preference.
I just have a quick question. I thoroughly enjoyed the movie.
Sorry.
I thoroughly enjoyed the movie and your talk.
Thank you.
But I'm just curious, did you end up marrying I think her name was Dorothy or something in the movie?
Dorothy Plunk. So her real name was Doris Ploss. And no, I didn't marry, I was not smart enough to marry a Colwood girl. I should have. Her real name was Doris Ploss, and unfortunately she passed away a few months ago. But she loved being sort of the villainess in the movie. She absolutely loved that. She was valedictorian of our high school class. Quentin, the prototypical nerd of all time, was the salutatorian because he made A's and everything and 100% on every test, but except phys ed. He said his brains were too heavy to work out, so they gave him a B in phys ed. So, yes, that's the wonderful Dorothy Plunk.
Hi, thank you very much for the time you've lent us tonight. I just wanted to ask a quick question about something you mentioned briefly. You said you were involved in the Hubble telescope repair.
Right.
And I read recently that Jared Isaacman, the Trump's nominee for NASA administrator, had been talking about doing another repair for the Hubble Space Station, and that NASA shut that down. What do you make about doing another repair to the Hubble Space Station, and whether or not that's a good idea? Okay, it's difficult without the shuttle. I know Jared very well, and I've talked to him about this. So let me tell you a quick thing about Hubble Space Telescope repair. So I worked with Kathy Sullivan and Bruce McCandless, astronauts, on the Hubble in a neutral buoyancy simulator. I would go down in the suit, and some other engineers down in the suit, and we would basically go through the procedures on how to deploy the Hubble Space Telescope if astronauts had to go outside. And theoretically, it should have just been launched automatically, but there was always a chance it would get hung up in the cargo bay. So we trained Kathy and Bruce in that big tank, which was 75 feet across and 40 feet deep, with a perfect model of the Hubble Space Telescope and the shuttle cargo bay. And so when it went up, they actually did have to go out and get one of the solar panels to unroll. And then they found out it was nearsighted, which I, by the way, had nothing to do with. So, so now we had to repair it. And Jay Leno and so on, and Tonight Show was calling it the Hubble Space Paperweight. And they were all having a lot of fun with this very important space observatory. And NASA, in its wisdom, decided to assign Story Musgrave
to be the lead on the team of astronauts that go up and repair it. Story is quite the character. He's been married, I don't know how many times, 7, I think. I have a joke about that, but I can't tell it in the mixed company. But anyway, but Story, he's a medical doctor and has several PhDs. Fascinating guy, just different type of guy. So he brought his team in of astronauts. We're going to repair the Hubble Space Telescope. So Homer and the rest of you engineers get in a suit and go down there and tell us how to do it. And meanwhile, Story had fallen in love with Dorothy Hamill, the ice skater. Hamill Camel, which you may remember. And Dorothy had convinced Story, or had told Story, that the only way that she won all her gold medals in the Olympics and so on was that the way she trained, she never did just part of her performance, she did it from beginning to end. And so Story came in and told us there in Huntsville, all right, I want end-to-end training. And we're going, Story, that's 6 hours underwater at 40 feet. You will get the bends. You'll get decompression. You figure it out. I'm going to have end-to-end training. So we went back to the drawing board. I didn't, but the engineers that had built the suit, and they came up with, all right, you're going to have to, in order to go 6 hours and not get the bends, we're going to have to reduce the nitrogen in the air we pump down and increase the oxygen. This was the beginning of a gas called nitrox, which allows divers to spend a lot more time underwater. And the engineer said, there's only one problem. It might catch on fire. No problem, Homer. Get in the suit. Let's see if this thing will catch on fire. And I'm going, you safety divers, you're going to look after me, right? And so several of us engineers went in. We didn't catch on fire. And we did let Story have his end-to-end training. They went up and repaired the Hubble perfectly. But the Hubble was locked down in the cargo bay. And all of the repair missions, the Hubble has been locked in the cargo bay, which gives it a stable platform. The problem with what Jared wants to do is to basically float out on an umbilical and mess with the Hubble. That's probably going to put a wobble in it, and you can destroy it that way. So maybe when Starship, by the way, did it work today? Did anybody know? Scrubbed it. Good. Good. I can watch it tomorrow or whenever. So maybe Starship can go up and give the Hubble a stable platform. But I don't think you can just float out of a Dragon and on an umbilical and do anything with it. So that's my long answer to your short question. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you so much for your talk. I'm curious, coming from a small town in West Virginia, your connection to being a scuba instructor for 15 years, was that a stepping stone for you in working with NASA, or just something you were interested in? Well,
it worked. And you're from West Virginia?
No, I'm from Kentucky.
Oh, okay. Close enough. We'll claim you. All part of Appalachia, right? Well, yes and no. I mean, one thing was that I'd become a scuba instructor in 1973, and I was working for the Army at that time as an Army civilian. So when I later applied to work at Marshall Space Flight Center, they actually wanted to hire me as a computer programmer. The last class, and it was just an extra that had been added on that I took at Virginia Tech, was Fortran. Remember Fortran? And for some reason, I really liked it, but I hadn't used it in all these years. And but I put that on my application to Marshall. And the space lab that they were flying, the computers in the space lab used Fortran, and they needed somebody that knew this ancient language that could come in and program it for them. So I was hired by the Space Lab Program Office to come in, write the language for these computers, and I did that for 6 months, and it worked. And I said, now I want to do something else. So I became an astronaut training manager, and then also worked in a neutral buoyancy simulator. So that's where the scuba came in. So I already had those credentials, and it was a good thing. I loved that. They even paid us a little extra. It was a little dangerous. We would have paid them to let us do it. But thank you for your question.
Thank you for your talk, Mr. Hickam. I wonder, as a former employee of NASA, how do you feel about the future of the organization as we're increasingly seeing private space companies like SpaceX begin to develop? How do you think NASA can compete with them in the coming years and decades?
Okay, so NASA's got to change. What I recommended for Marshall Space Flight Center, Marshall Space Flight Center is responsible for the Space Launch System, the SLS, extremely expensive chemical rocket that probably is going to get canceled here, but they've spent a lot of time on it. And because NASA is used to having their own rocket, right? They had the Saturns, and then they had the Space Shuttle, and then now they want to have the SLS. And really, I think it's so expensive to build this thing, and it can only fly every couple of years, that it's probably going to get canceled. But I think that's good. Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville especially should get totally out of the chemical rocket business. The commercial companies know all the tricks. They can do that and get into advanced propulsion now. That's the future. Nuclear rocket engines, antimatter rocket engines, any kind of advanced propulsion, that's what Huntsville now should get into. And also I recommend, since Huntsville, I know when you go to the movies and you read the books, you only hear about Houston and the Cape. The real work is done in Huntsville, trust me on that. So Huntsville was responsible for Skylab, our first space station, was responsible for Space Lab. It's like a space station, but it was in the shuttle cargo bay. And then Huntsville was responsible for building all the modules that are on the International Space Station. So what I think Huntsville needs to do right now is to reach out and become the expert in building habitats that will go on the Moon and Mars. So that's my recommendation. If they just continue along the way, they're not going to have jobs. And they should. We still need a federal space program. SpaceX and Blue Origin can do everything with chemical rockets right now, but for advanced propulsion and also learning how to live on the Moon and the different planets, NASA needs to start doing that. So.
Hi, John Simpson from Beverly Hills, Michigan. As a kid, I made Estes rockets, Penrose, Colorado. I'm sure you know about them.
Yes.
Anyways, and I want to thank you. You have, your work has resulted in a great treasure for me, and that is watching your movie with my grandson. And it was one of those moments that just I treasure forever. I have a question, and that is regarding the movie. It was mentioned in the comments earlier that one thing you wished that was in the movie was accolades for your father's wisdom and engineering not officially recognized. Any other things that you wish would have been included in the movie?
Well, I mean, looking at the time, yes. I thought we should have more Homer and Valentine scenes, for instance. But no, I mean, looking back on it, they just did such a great job. And editing, I mean, you don't know when you're making a movie whether it's going to be any good or not. It's when you get back into the editing. And I had no clue, because they didn't use all the scenes that they filmed. I had no idea how this movie would turn out. And so I can't argue anything about this movie. It's just, it works. It really works. And I like to say, and I think it's true, every substitute teacher in the world shows October Sky. I've heard from the students and say, we're so sick of seeing your movie every time. I've seen it 3 times growing up. It's like, can you make another one? I'm trying right now with December Sky. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time, sir.
You
I'm
bet.
curious, from like the first moment you got into space exploration all the way up till now,
Yeah.
in your opinion, what do you think is the most impressive, innovative piece of technology that's been created in that realm of science?
Well, the Hubble Space Telescope has taught us so much about our solar system and the universe, and all the great observatories, the Webb. I think those are, if we didn't do anything, we never flew an astronaut in space, and we had those space observatories, you'd have to give NASA all the accolades in the world for doing that. So what I see in the future is I think we should go back to the moon. I wrote a book called Back to the Moon because I was so irritated about NASA because they weren't going back to the moon and just wanted to fly the shuttle. And so I think that now we should go back to the moon and put a habitat there, what I call an outpost, like the Old West, where we had outposts and the settlers followed, and the same thing should be done on the moon, and that's what I recommend very much. Mike Pence appointed me to the National Space Council. Kamala Harris fired me. But I put in Mike's head about let's go back to the moon and stay. And so he announced the Artemis program in 2019, the 50th anniversary of Apollo 11. They kind of mucked it up after that, unfortunately, which I would go into the National Space Council, and they're all going, well, we're really going to Mars, but we'll stop by the moon. I'm going, no, you need to go to the moon. Forget Mars. We don't need Mars. And that's why they fired me. So, but I got my say anyway. Thank you. They didn't really fire me. They just kind of shuffled me off to the exit. It's like, we've decided to appoint somebody else, Homer, to take that position. But I'm hoping J.D. Vance, a fellow Appalachian, will bring it all back.
Mr. Hickam, I just wanted to say I appreciate your hard work and your ability to inspire the youth of our nation to just go out there and reach their goals. I know as a child watching a bunch of those movies myself when I was in school, it definitely inspired me, and so it was cool to watch it again. Also, thank you for your service to our country. I actually just wrapped up my time with the 4th Infantry Division as well, so
all right.
We share a little bit.
So you're the one with the hooyah on that?
Yes, sir, yep.
Great, 4th ID.
But before I spent my time there, I was a cadet in a program called the Civil Air Patrol, and it's the only reason I know about the German U-boats off the east coast of the United States. And so I was gonna ask you about your research in that area and how you kind of got into it yourself, and did it happen to come about as a result of your time in
the first
program?
9 months of the U-boat war, January through August and a little bit into September, when they first came over, the only war machine that the U-boats were afraid of was aircraft, because if you could spot them, then you could go out and get them, because they had to come up. They were running on diesel. They had to pump air into the diesels to run. So we weren't able to stay underwater that long. So if you could spot them early enough, you could get a Coast Guard cutter or a destroyer out there. So they were very afraid. And the CAP, I don't think they ever saw a U-boat that got sunk, but they scared them a lot. And that meant that they would dive, waste a whole lot of time. Meanwhile, the convoy goes by. And so they were very valuable during the war. We also had something called the Hooligan Navy, which was private owners of various, I'm trying to remember, there were, I think, Hemingway. Hemingway had a little plywood speedboat, and he would go out looking for U-boats off the Keys where he was living at that time. And again, they scared the U-boats enough to dive and wasted a lot of their time. And so they were very valuable to do that, so yeah. And I've talked to CAP students. A lot of them end up coming to Space Camp. Again, I'm on the board there, and Space Camp is just a great program. Jared Isaacman, who we were talking about, going to be the new administrator, is a Space Camp, actually Aviation Challenge former student. He has donated about $18 million to Space Camp. We're building a whole new Inspiration 4 training center with Jared's money. And Tim Sheehy, the new senator from Montana, is also a Space Camp graduate and has donated generously to Space Camp. So we have a great program there. And again, if you know, especially young people that are interested in space, go out to spacecampusa.com and look it up and try to get them to Huntsville to go to Space Camp. And I'll probably see them there while they're there. Okay.
We now have time for one more question.
Hi again. Just wanted to ask, what do you think comes after decommissioning the ISS? And do you think we can beat the Chinese to the moon before their 2029 goal?
We've already beat them. We were there in 1969. I don't care. They want to go now, great, have at it. We've been there, for a long time. But I hope that we do go and we do build a habitat there. And what was the other question?
What comes after decommissioning the ISS?
I hope we don't decommission it. I'm against that. What I think we need to do is to send up new modules. The problem with the space station, if you look at it, it's like cluttered. They spend most of their time looking for stuff. It's so cluttered. And the air is foul in there. The scrubbers are all worn out. The metallurgy, been in space for all these years and getting all that radiation, the metallurgy is starting to break down. The Russian segment is leaking like a sieve. They basically have to close off the Russians part of the day so that the whole thing doesn't leak down. And so there are problems with the International Space Station. But what they could do, and what I think they should do, is to send up new modules by commercial companies, take out the old modules, put in the new modules, and keep this thing going. I think it's a terrible waste to splash it in the Pacific Ocean. And I don't think they will. I think eventually they'll do what I'm suggesting. So we'll see. Anyway, Elon's building a tug to push it into the Pacific Ocean. That tug is going to come in handy for a whole lot of other things. And I think Elon knows that. So.
Please join me in thanking Mr. Hickam.
Thank you. Thank you so much.